So recently I had a client, Nina, who competed at a regional powerlifting competition here in Germany with the hopes of qualifying for the German national champs. Now, in her warm-ups, we tracked her velocities and used VBT to assess how we were going on the day and to help us make better attempt selections. Now, I haven't seen another good video kind of going through how to actually go about this, so I thought that I'd make one showing you why we use this and how we implemented it. So I heard one of the athletes at Sheffield, and I believe this was Emil with his coach, Kedrick Kwan, who's another Kiwi, by the way, had used velocities during his warm-up to help inform their attempt selection. So from memory, and I don't remember where I heard this, so correct me below if you know where they were talking about this, but from memory, they had seen from his warm-ups that they think he had about an extra 5 kilos capacity than they had predicted when they wrote his competition plan. And so they put his opener up 5 kilos, and then that was able to, then make the next jump 5 kilos heavier to his second, and so forward to his third, ultimately meaning that he had more scope to go heavier on his third attempt. Now, I'd previously thought about how cool would it be to be able to use velocity in a warm-up room at a competition to better assess, somewhat objectively, their capacity on the day and then to better inform attempt selection. But I didn't know logistically how that would work in a warm-up room. But after seeing somebody do it at Sheffield, I figured if they can make it work at Sheffield, we might as well give it a try. Now, the spreadsheet that I ended up developing to automate all of this can be found in the description below if you want to use it for your own competitions or even if you just want to use it in training to pick your weights. So I planned to use my Rep 1 tether device on the day rather than using a camera solution because I figured that would just be easier in a warm-up room. Previously, Nina has been tracking her training with Quick VBT, which is a really reliable camera app for velocities, and so we had a couple of months data and she was already used to using velocities with her training. But I did lend Nina my Rep 1 device for her last 5 weeks of training so that we had plenty of data on the exact same device we were going to be using on the day. So after her last week of training, I got the velocity data from the Rep 1 device and I cleaned it and analyzed it for her first repetition velocities and then built what's called a load velocity profile. So this is where we go each weight that we can pull from her training data and we match that to the speed that she'd normally hit that weight at and then create a graph of those. And this means for a given weight, we can say she should be able to move it about this fast. And the gradient of that slope has been shown to be stable for athletes over a moderate time course, even when they're getting stronger. So even if all of the weights are going up, the angle of that slope seems to be consistent. So then I took all that data and I constructed a summary in the spreadsheet where we could very quickly plug in her weights on the day when she was in the warm-up room and see if she was moving faster or slower than what was predicted from her training. So basically say if she normally hit 120 kilos at 0.18 meters per second, but on the day she hit it at 0.2 meters per second, then we know that she was moving it faster than she normally does. The spreadsheet would then move that line up because 120 kilos is now effectively a lower percentage of her 1RM than it was, and then it will give us an idea of how many kilos ahead we think she is today compared to her training. And then she'd take her next warm-up, and if it was faster or slower again than predicted, then it would continue to adjust. Now, I was surprised at how easy this was to use in the warm-up room, even when working in with other athletes on the same rep. So I didn't even need to connect the device to my phone because I could just read the speeds off the inbuilt display as each rep came in, or you can also track back through and see them if I needed to double check afterwards. So basically after each warm-up was loaded, collars went on, connected the base of the device to the rack, connected the end of the tether to the bar, she'd go and she'd do her set, put it back, and then I just removed the device, and then we were able to change the next warm-up from there. So it really only added a couple of seconds to each warm-up, just as if you were putting another plate on. So looking at the numbers that I pulled down during her warm-ups, for her squats, we could see that her warm-up at 115 kilos was about at the expected speed within rounding compared to her training. 125 kilos was a little faster than expected, and 135 kilos was a little faster again. So from that, I knew that she would comfortably hit her third projected squat because it was, in line with, or if not faster than what we could see from her training. So as the goal of the day was just to hit the 430 kilo qualifying total that she needed, and the already planned third squat would suffice as far as building her subtotal for that, we decided not to move the weights up, even though her warm-ups were looking a little faster, because this potentially gave her a little bit more capacity for deadlifts later down the line if she needed it. Now, it's important to note here that using a load velocity profile with first rep velocities like this has been known to overestimate the 1RMs generally. So I think it's important to be slightly conservative when you're interpreting these numbers. My guess is that the reason it overestimates it is because it's presuming that your form and the way you're doing the lift is going to be exactly the same. And most people either have a slight change in strategy with their technique, like they'll use, hips or knees or whatever slightly differently at higher loads, or they'll have a little bit of form breakdown. And the model is basically not going to be able to predict that from your lower loads. Now, looking at bench press here, so the previous flight progressed through their squats really, really fast. So we ended up having to compress her bench warm up slightly. So I didn't get as many of the velocities for her bench warm up in there as I planned to. 70 kilos moved slightly slower at 0.2 meters per second than the predicted 0.22 meters per second. Now, I didn't tell her this at the time because I didn't want to psych her out or like nocebo her with the lifts, but I kept this in mind as we continued warming up. So the plan was to open at 80 kilos and then either move to 82.5 or 85 for the second, and then consequently 85 or 87.5 for the thirds, basically depending on how that opener moved. Now, when she came off the platform from her openers, she said she wasn't sure if she thought 82 or 85 was the right move based just on how it felt. But because I knew that her warm-ups had been slower, I suggested that we go for the more conservative option of 82.5 kilos for her second, and that ended up definitely being the right choice because by the time we got to 85 for her third, it was pretty slow, and I don't know if 87.5 would have been there on the day, even though she's hit 88 kilos in training. Now for deadlift, we took velocities for 2 of her warm-ups, but one of them ended up being unusable because the magnet disconnected from the bar when she put it down, and then that spiked the velocity up. In retrospect, I should have used the strap rather than the magnet for deadlift, and I'd recommend you do that if you end up trying this. But based on the speed of the warm-up that we were able to use, it was far above what she'd been seeing in training, which is pretty normal for her deadlift after a taper. So the plan from her deadlift was to open at 175 and then move to a moderately heavy 185 for her second attempt because that would secure the qualifying total. And that would mean that she'd still have her third attempt if for some reason she'd had to have retaken either her opener or her second attempt. And from her warm-ups, we knew that 185 would be well within reach for a second attempt as it was. So from there, since she already hit the 430 qualifying total today, and we still had her third attempt, she decided she wanted to see what she had left in the tank. 190 seemed pretty reasonable based on the speed that we got from that one warm-up. So she decided to give it a go and ended up narrowly missing it and kind of getting pulled out of shape a little bit. Now, I suspect had she been able to maintain her normal technique and not get pulled forward, that she would have been able to finish it and lock it out. But this also could have just been a case of she actually wasn't strong enough to maintain her form, and that was a limiting factor rather than it just being like a misgroove. So I'd say this was a pretty successful test run. Probably the main thing I got from this would be the confidence I had in my decisions on the day. Once you've coached at enough competitions, you get a pretty good feel for watching the warm-ups or watching the first attempt and saying, how is this moving compared to how this athlete normally moves at this weight? You know, is this looking clean? Are they getting pulled out of shape at all? Is this looking nice and fast? But there's always a little bit of doubt that creeps in. Like, did it actually move faster? Or do just both I and the athlete want it to have moved faster? And we just want to say, oh yeah, that was, moving really well today because we want to go into the day with confidence and that would be a good outcome for us. Or am I being too conservative? Is this actually moving faster than normal? And I am just worried about putting up maybe their opener or their second attempt because I don't want to put it up and then be wrong and then miss an attempt. Particularly with the decision we had to make for her second bench press, it was very easy to say, okay, she's not sure about this. The velocity says it's a little slow. I think it looked a little slow. Let's go with the conservative option. So it almost acted like a tiebreaker. I think if she'd come off the opener and both her and I had gone, nope, the opener looked really good. I think we can go to 85 for the second attempt. Then we could have ignored the velocities. But because one of us was unsure, and then I think it moved a little slow, you could kind of go with, 2 out of 3 votes. So from here, I've further refined the data cleaning and analysis from the spreadsheet that I used on the day, as we hope to use this again for when she does compete in the nationals that she qualified for. So if you'd like a copy of this and you're an approved version of the spreadsheet to use with your own competitions, or even just in your training, you can find that linked in the description below. And I'll put in there a bit more in-depth video explaining all of the data cleaning and how we actually got to the final numbers rather than boring that with you here. So as well as the version of the spreadsheet that takes the raw data exports from the Rep1 device, I've also adapted a version to take the raw data exports from the Quick VBT app. So if you don't have a Rep1 tether, you can also just use the Quick VBT camera app. And there's actually a validation study showing that in the right conditions, the Quick VBT data is pretty equivalent to the data from a Rep1 tether. Now, I don't know how using a camera app will go in competition, because it's hard to control the lighting and angles and you have to take up a bit more space, and you also then have to process the videos after you use them rather than just reading straight off the device. So this version of the spreadsheet takes those raw data exports and gives you that first rep load velocity profile, and you can set it up to do as many different lifts as you want. My plan in the future is to also add things like the last rep RPE profiles and maybe a couple of other metrics as I find use for them. And then also, hopefully, I will integrate this with my warm-up calculator and my other program spreadsheets. Now, if you'd like to learn more on how to actually use velocity within your training, then head along to my training community, the House of Strength, where I'm currently uploading modules on how to use VBT, how to get good data, what to do with that data, and what this actually means for your training. And you can also ask me any questions you have there directly. There you'll also find an amazing community of other lifters, including Nina, as well as a program library and some other resources. And there are also options for coaching if that's more your speed. So let me know in the comments if this was helpful for you or if you have any questions, and let me know what you'd like to hear about next.